My boyfriend left me for my white sister because I was black. They smiled too soon. The week my father finally asked me to save his business, I was already the person who got to decide whether it lived or died. He just didn't know that part yet. 9 years before that, my boyfriend stood in my kitchen on a Tuesday in April, one hand flat on the counter like he needed it to hold him up, and told me my own sister was easier to love out loud. He didn't yell it. He said it the way you'd read someone a weather report after they'd already packed an umbrella. And when I sat down at my father's table for the first time in 2 years, surrounded by people smiling like nothing had ever happened, I already knew the invitation had a dollar sign hiding behind it. I just didn't know yet how many zeros. My name is Nia Bennett. I'm 35. I run credit risk for the Carolinas region at Meridian Trust, which is a polite way of saying that when a small business in the state asks a bank for money, there's a real chance the last signature on the file is mine. I've read over 900 loan applications in the last 4 years. I know the difference between a business that's struggling and a business that's already dead, and I know it faster than most people know their own bank balance. So when my father's name showed up on a file 11 days after that dinner, I didn't need to ask what it meant. But let me back up. Before the backyard, before the string lights, before my father folded his hands the way he used to before he said something he'd rehearsed, I need to tell you who I was the morning the invitation came, because that's the daughter they were counting on, and she wasn't the one who showed up. If you've ever had to be the strong one, so someone else got to be the soft one, stay with me. This one's for you. It was a Tuesday in March, gray and wet, the kind of Charlotte morning where the sky can't decide if it's going to rain or just threaten to. I was at my desk on the 11th floor with a cold cup of coffee and a spreadsheet open, reviewing a restaurant group's expansion request, when my phone lit up on the corner of my desk. A text, then another, then a third. Karen, Mia, honey, it's been too long. Your father and I would love to have you over Sunday. Just family. 6 o'clock, no pressure, just love. I read it twice. Then I did what I always do with anything that doesn't add up. I looked for what was missing. There was no "I'm sorry," no "we were wrong," no mention of 2 years since I'd last sat at that table, since the wedding, since the last conversation with my father that ended with him hanging up on me in the parking lot of a Harris Teeter. Just love, no subject attached to it, no one responsible for where it had gone. I typed back 4 words. I'll be there Sunday. Then I set the phone face down on my desk, picked my pen back up, and pretended my hand wasn't shaking over a P&L statement that had nothing to do with any of this. That night I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed a title. Boundaries. Underneath it, 3 lines. Asterisk, no money. No promises. Leave before they clear the plates if it turns into an ambush. Asterisk. I read it back once, then locked my phone and went to bed, and some part of me, the part that had grown up in that house, already knew I'd need it. I need you to understand something about my house growing up, because it explains everything that came after. My mother, Renee, died when I was 19. Cardiomyopathy. Her heart, weakened for years, finally gave out on a Thursday in October while she was folding laundry in the hallway. I was a sophomore at UNC Charlotte. I drove home in the dark not knowing yet, and by the time I got there, the ambulance lights were already gone and my father was sitting on the porch steps in his work boots, still covered in drywall dust from a job he never went back to finish. My mother used to braid my hair every Sunday morning before church, gospel radio playing low from a boombox older than me, and she'd hum along under her breath while her fingers worked. That's the version of my childhood I keep, not the arguments that came later. Just her hands, and that radio, and the smell of the leave-in conditioner she used, the green bottle with the gold cap. 2 years after she died, my father remarried. Karen was a marketing coordinator he'd met at a Chamber of Commerce mixer, warm and easy in a way my house hadn't been in a long time, and I understood, even at 21, why he wanted that. What I didn't expect was her daughter. Paige was 17 months younger than me. White, blonde, raised in Cornelius in a house with a pool. When our parents married, we were suddenly sisters, not by blood, but by every dinner table and every holiday photo from then on. And for a long time I loved her. I want to be honest about that before I tell you the rest. Paige was funny and a little scattered, and she cried at commercials, and when I failed my CFA Level 1 exam the first time, she was the one who drove to my apartment with a bottle of wine and didn't ask a single question about it. I don't tell you this to make what happened more forgivable. I tell you because it's true, And because the people who hurt you rarely arrive as villains. They arrive as your sister. I was the organized one. The one with a 5-year plan taped inside a kitchen cabinet. Credit analyst at 24, underwriting manager at 28, director of commercial credit at 32. Not because I was more talented than anyone else in my building, because I'd learned early that being good at something was the safest kind of visible. Numbers didn't have an opinion about who I was. They just added up, or they didn't. I met Derek Whitfield at a 4th of July cookout in 2013, at a friend's place off Providence Road. He was 24, working framing crews for a general contractor, funny in a quiet way, the kind of man who remembered what you told him 3 weeks later. We dated 7 years. He knew my coffee order. He knew which of my mother's recipe cards I still couldn't cook from because the handwriting made my chest hurt. For a long time, I thought I knew exactly where my life was going. Here's what I didn't want to admit for a long time, even to myself. My father had a way of introducing us that I let myself misread for years. At his 60th birthday, in a rented hall off Highway 51, he stood at the front of the room with a glass of sweet tea and said, "This is my Paige. She lights up every room she's in." Then, almost as an afterthought, a hand toward me. "And this is Nia. She's the strong one. Numbers girl. Doesn't need much. Doesn't need much." I laughed it off in the moment. Everyone did. But I wrote it down later that night in a note on my phone, the way I write down everything that doesn't add up, because some part of me already knew I'd need the record. There were more. A Thanksgiving where Paige forgot to bring a side dish, and it became a charming story for years. That's just Paige. And the year I showed up with the wrong wine and my father asked, in front of 11 people, if I even knew anything besides work. A summer when Paige's car got repossessed, and my father quietly covered 3 months of payments and called it helping her get back on her feet. The same year I asked for a $2,000 loan toward my CFA prep course, and he told me I was old enough to figure that out myself. I want to be clear. None of it, on its own, would have broken anything. It's never one thing. It's the weight of 100 small ones, stacked so slowly you don't feel the floor bending until you're already through it. The night that mattered most happened in April, 7 years into my relationship with Derek, 6 months before he left. My father had asked him to help finish out a bathroom remodel at a rental property, and I stopped by after work with dinner for both of them. I heard them before they saw me, my father's voice carrying from the garage, low and certain, the way he talked when he thought no one but a man was listening. "Paige is just easier, you understand," he was saying. "People like her right off. Doesn't take work. You've got a business to build, son. Optics matter. You'll go further with somebody who makes people comfortable the second she walks in." I stood in the doorway holding 2 styrofoam containers of shrimp and grits, and Derek didn't say anything back. That was the part that stayed with me longest. Not what my father said. The silence where Derek should have defended me and didn't. I never told either of them I heard it. I went home that night, opened my phone, and wrote it down word for word in a note titled Receipts, the same folder where, over the years, I'd end up keeping a screenshot of a text, a photo of a check, a voicemail transcript. I didn't know yet what I was building a file for. I just knew I was building one. 6 months later, on a Tuesday in April, Derek stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd made him coffee 1,000 mornings, one hand flat on the counter, and told me he'd fallen for Paige. He said it carefully, like he'd practiced. He said she made things lighter. He said being with me sometimes felt like walking on a floor that might give out, which I understood, much later, was never about me at all. It was about a version of himself he didn't want people to have to work to understand. "So that's it," I said. "Not a question." "I didn't plan this," he said. "You didn't stop it either," I said, and that was the last full conversation we ever had as 2 people who used to love each other. A year later, he married Paige in a barn venue in Waxhaw with string lights and a bluegrass band, and my father asked me, 2 weeks before the wedding, to give a toast, for the sake of the family. I went. I sat through the ceremony with my hands folded in my lap like I was at a business meeting I couldn't leave early. I did not give a toast. I left before the cake was cut, and in the parking lot, my father called my phone and told me I was making everything about myself. That was the last real conversation we had. 2 years of silence followed. 2 years where the family group chat went on without me, where birthdays happened without me, where I found out my father had a small stroke. A mild one, he was fine, through a cousin's Facebook post instead of a phone call. 2 years. Then a text with a red heart at the end of it. I didn't spend those 2 years plotting anything. I want to say that clearly, because what happened later wasn't revenge dressed up as coincidence. It was just my life, continuing without them in it. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Alicia Ford, in a strip mall office off East Boulevard with a white noise machine outside her door. In our third session, she said something I still carry around. Asterisk, you didn't fail to earn their love. You succeeded at a job you were never supposed to have, being everyone's proof that things were fine. Asterisk, I sat with that for a long time. I finished my CFA on the second try, in a Marriott conference room in Raleigh with a proctor who kept clearing his throat. I moved from a 2-bedroom rental on Central Avenue to a townhouse I bought outright at 33, closing on it on a Thursday in November with a check I wrote myself. No cosigner, no help, 940 square feet that were entirely, unquestionably mine. I adopted a scruffy terrier mix from the Humane Society of Charlotte and named her Ledger, which made my coworkers laugh and made perfect sense to me. My coworker Priya Anand, who sat 2 desks down and had covered for me more Mondays than either of us wanted to count, became the closest thing I had to family during that stretch. We ate lunch together most days at a taco spot on South Boulevard, and she never once asked me to explain the empty side of the family group photo she saw on my desk. She just knew there was one. I moved from underwriting manager to director of commercial credit in year 2 of the silence. In year 3, I was offered SVP of credit risk for the Carolinas, a role that put roughly $400 million of the bank's small business lending portfolio somewhere near my desk. I didn't call my father to tell him. There was no one to tell. That was its own kind of quiet grief, the kind nobody sends flowers for. Meanwhile, from a distance I never asked for, I learned the shape of the life that had replaced me. My father and Derek had gone into business together, Bennett and Whitfield Builders, a custom framing and remodel outfit, the kind of partnership that made sense on paper and probably felt, for a while, like family finally working the way it was supposed to. Paige, through a connection of Karen's, had landed a job in the marketing department at Meridian Trust, my bank, a building I walked into every morning, 30 floors and a world away from where I sat. I didn't know that yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. But hold on to it. Asterisk quick pause, because I want to ask you something before we keep going. If you've ever been the child in your family who had to be capable so somebody else got to be soft, tell me what they called it in your house. Mine called it being the strong one. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe, because in about 9 days from that dinner invitation, my father's name is going to show up on a file with my signature on the bottom of it. Let's get back to it. Asterisk. Bennett and Whitfield Builders had a good first 18 months. Then, like a lot of small contractors, they hit the thing nobody budgets for, a bad job. A commercial build-out in Fort Mill went sideways when the client's architect changed the plans twice mid-project, and Bennett and Whitfield ate the cost difference to keep the relationship. Then a subcontractor, Ferris Electric, filed a mechanic's lien over a disputed $42,000 invoice. Then a merchant cash advance company, the kind that lends fast and charges brutal effective rates, stepped in to cover payroll for 2 months, at terms my father, a man who once argued with a cashier over a 50-cent coupon, would never have accepted if he'd had any other option left. I didn't know any of this yet. I found it out the way most families find things out. Slowly, sideways, through people who weren't supposed to say anything. What I did know was that Karen's texts started arriving with more frequency that winter. A thinking of you. A photo of a sunset with no caption. Then, 3 weeks before the dinner invitation, a message that should have told me everything if I'd been paying closer attention. Asterisk, did you know Paige works at your bank now? Small world. Asterisk, I did not know that. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long moment, feeling something cold settle low in my stomach, the way you feel right before a walk-in cooler alarm goes off 2 floors down. Small world. Sure. Sunday came warm for March, the kind of early spring day that fools you into leaving your jacket in the car. My father's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac off Free Road, a 2-story brick colonial he and Karen had bought the year they married. I pulled up at 5:52, 8 minutes early on purpose, and counted the cars along the curb before I even put my Honda in park. Just family, Karen had written. I counted 9 vehicles, My father's truck, still with the same dent in the tailgate from a job in 2019. Karen's Lexus, a silver SUV I recognized as Aunt Denise's. Two I didn't recognize at all. And parked crooked across two spots, like whoever drove it hadn't cared enough to fix it. Derek's F-150. I sat there with the engine off for a full minute, reading the note on my phone. Asterisk no money. No promises. Leave before they clear the plates. Asterisk then I got out, smoothed down the gray dress I'd chosen specifically because it wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone, and walked around back because I could already hear voices and a speaker playing something with a bass line through the side gate. The backyard had been transformed. String lights zigzagged over the patio. A folding table held a spread that hadn't come from anyone's kitchen. A charcuterie board the size of a windshield. A caterer's chafing dishes still steaming. A case of wine with a label I recognized from a vendor tasting 2 summers back. Easily $30 a bottle. My father did not spend $30 a bottle on wine. My father drove 40 minutes out of his way for gas that was 6 cents cheaper. 11 people turned to look at me at once. My father stood up from the head of the table, arms already opening. There she is. Applause. Actual applause. 3 or 4 people clapping like I just walked off a plane after deployment, not driven 22 minutes across town. Aunt Denise pressed a hand to her chest. Karen came around the table first, pulling me into a hug that smelled like the same perfume she'd worn for 14 years, and said, into my ear, low enough that only I could hear it, "We've missed our girl." Our girl, not my daughter. Not your father missed you. Something about the phrasing sat wrong, the way a decimal point in the wrong place turns a small number into a large one. I sat down in the one open seat, directly across from Derek, who nodded at me like we were old co-workers instead of 2 people who'd shared a bed for 7 years. Paige sat beside him, and when she caught my eye, something flickered across her face that I couldn't name yet. Not triumph, not quite guilt either. Something closer to exhaustion. Just family, huh? I said to my father, keeping my voice light. He waved a hand. Well, once your aunt heard, and then Cortez, and then you know how it goes. I knew exactly how it went. For the first 40 minutes, it was almost easy. Aunt Denise asked about work. Cortez told a long story about a fishing trip that had no real ending. Karen refilled my sweet tea before I'd finished it and told me my hair looked healthy, which is the kind of compliment you only give someone you've spent years finding other things to say about. I answered questions the way I answer them at closing meetings, accurate, brief, no more than the file requires. The pressure started the way it always starts in my family. Not directly. In a current. Must be nice, Aunt Denise said, not unkindly, gesturing loosely at nothing at me at the idea of me. Working downtown in one of those big buildings. You always did land on your feet, Cortez said, and laughed like it was a compliment, though I noticed he didn't say hard work, he said land, like it had been luck. Karen mentioned, almost as a throwaway, that Paige had been promoted last spring, marketing coordinator to senior coordinator, if you can believe it, and looked at me with an expression that wanted something from me I didn't have a name for yet, recognition, maybe, or permission. I asked Derek, evenly, how the business was going. His jaw did the same thing it used to do when a job ran over budget. Good. Busy season. A beat too fast, a beat too flat. I asked my father directly, how's Bennett in Whitfield? He set his fork down, folded his hands on the edge of the table, the exact gesture I remembered from every serious conversation of my childhood, and I felt my whole body go still, the way it does right before a number on a spreadsheet tells you something you already suspected. Nia, he said, we've been meaning to talk to you about that, actually. Here it was. We've hit a rough patch, he said. Nothing we can't handle. But the bank's being difficult about a loan we need to keep the crew paid through spring. And I got to thinking, you're in a position now where you could help. Not a handout. Just you know people. You know how these things work. What are you asking me, Dad? He looked at me the way he used to look at a job that was behind schedule, like the delay was somehow a character flaw in whoever he was looking at. I'm asking you to do something for this family for once, instead of the other way around. You've got the position. Use it. 11 people at that table, and not one of them had said the word sorry since I'd walked in. Not for the 2 years. Not for the wedding. Not for the toast I never gave, or the reasons I never gave it. You're the strong one, Nia. Karen added, reaching over to pat my hand like that settled something. You've never needed things handed to you. Paige needs the softer landings. You understand. You understand. The same 2 words my father had said to Derek in that garage 9 years earlier, and I sat there with my sweet tea going warm in my hand and understood, fully for the first time, that I had spent 35 years being loved for exactly one thing: my capacity to carry weight without complaint. I didn't answer right away. I've learned that silence does more work in my family than any sentence I could build. 5 seconds. 8. Long enough for Cortez to suddenly find his napkin fascinating, for Aunt Denise to refill a glass that didn't need refilling. Paige spoke first, quietly, not looking at her mother. Dad, I don't think this is. Paige, Karen said, in the tone of a woman closing a door. I stood up before dessert came out. The way I'd promised myself I would if the evening turned into what I already knew it was. I'll think about what you're asking, I said, which was true, and also the last honest sentence I gave any of them that night. I hugged my father goodbye. I felt his hand pat my back twice, the way you pat a delivery driver who's dropped off something you didn't have to carry yourself. On my way out through the side gate, I passed close enough to the drink station to hear Karen, low, to Paige, thinking the music covered it. She'll say yes, Karen was saying. She always does when she thinks she's letting your father down. Give her a week. I didn't stop walking. I didn't need to hear anything else. I already had it. 11 days later, on a Thursday, I opened my queue at 8:40 in the morning with a coffee that was already going cold, the way it always does, and found a new commercial credit file routed to my desk for final tier review. Applicant * Bennett and Whitfield Builders, LLC. Requested * $340,000, SBA 7A. Equipment and expansion. Guarantors * Marcus D. Bennett, Derek J. Whitfield. I sat and looked at my father's full legal name on a bank document for longer than I want to admit. Here's the part one need you to understand, because it matters more than anything else in this story. I did not touch that file with anger. I touched it the same way I touch every file. Carefully, completely, and without a single opinion about who was attached to it, because the moment I have an opinion is the moment I stop being any good at my job. The first thing I did, before I read a single number, was email my compliance officer and formally recuse myself from the decision due to a family relationship with the applicants. That's not generosity. That's the law, and it's also, frankly, the only clean thing I could give his family. A decision that couldn't later be called unfair by them or by anyone else. The file went to a colleague of mine, Raj Patel, a senior underwriter 2 doors down who didn't know my last name from theirs and didn't need to. I stayed out of it entirely. I want to say that twice because it matters. I stayed out of it entirely. But I saw the outcome, the way you eventually see the outcome of anything that shares a floor with you. The debt service coverage ratio came back at 0.91. The bank's minimum, for a loan that size, is 1.25. In plain terms, the business wasn't generating enough cash to comfortably cover the payments it was already asking to take on. The math didn't work. Full stop, no opinion required. Worse, the application hadn't disclosed the pending mechanics lien from Ferris Electric, $62,000 in dispute, a fact that surfaced in a routine UCC and lien search, and that, on its own, is grounds for automatic decline, because omitting a pending legal claim on a federal loan application isn't an oversight the bank gets to be generous about. Raj declined the file on those 2 grounds alone, in writing, the way every file gets declined, with numbers, not feelings. I found out about it the way I find out about most decisions on my floor. A routine notice in my inbox 2 days later, because the applicant had listed me as an internal contact somewhere on the paperwork, maybe hoping that would help. It didn't. It couldn't. That's not how any of this works. And if it were, I wouldn't have a career worth having. My phone rang 40 minutes after the denial letter would have hit my father's mailbox. You did this, he said, before I even finished saying hello. I recused myself 11 days ago, Dad. I never touched your file. Don't lie to me, Nia. You got the position. You could have fixed this. I have a job, I said, and I kept my voice level, the way I do on every call that matters. My job is to be honest about what a business can actually afford, whether I like the people attached to it or not. Your loan didn't fail because of me. It failed because you're carrying 11% debt on a cash advance you never told me about, and because you didn't disclose a lawsuit on a federal application. Those are your numbers, Dad. Not mine. Silence on the line, long enough that I could hear, faintly, a television in the background. Then, quieter than I expected, almost like the air had gone out of him. "We're drowning, Nia." And there it was, the truest sentence anyone at that table had said to me in 2 years, and even then, it came wrapped in an ask instead of an apology. "I believe you," I said. "And if you want real help, an independent financial advisor, a restructuring consultant, someone who isn't me, I will help you find one this week. I mean that, but I'm not going to pretend a loan should have been approved when it shouldn't have. Not for you. Not for anybody." "So that's it," he said. "That's your answer." "I don't owe you my signature, Dad," I said. "I never did." He hung up first. I want to tell you what happened after, because it's the part that surprised me most. Karen posted something vague on Facebook a few days later about family who forgets where they came from, the kind of post designed to be understood by everyone and confirmed by no one. Aunt Denise texted once, gently, asking if I could just talk to your father, and I told her I already had. Derek never called at all. But 8 days after the denial, my phone lit up with a text from a number I hadn't heard from directly in 2 years. "Paige Asterisk, can we talk? Not about money. I promise. We met at a coffee shop on East Boulevard, not far from where Priya and I used to eat tacos, a place I picked because it was mine, not theirs." Paige showed up in a gray Meridian Trust lanyard she hadn't taken off from work, twisting it around 2 fingers the whole time she talked. "I've known since we were teenagers," she said, staring into her cup instead of at me. "The way your dad talked about you versus me. I told myself it wasn't real for so long because it was easier than admitting I was the one it was easier for." She looked up. "I'm not saying that to make you feel better. I'm saying it because I should have said it a long time ago, and I was a coward, and then I married the reason I should have said it sooner." I didn't forgive her in that conversation. I want to be honest about that, too. This isn't a story where everything gets tied up in a bow over a $12 latte. But I believed her, and belief is its own kind of door, even if it's not the same as opening it all the way. "I don't know what happens with Derek," I told her. "That's yours to carry, not mine anymore. But thank you for saying it out loud." She nodded, and for a second, just a second, I saw the girl who used to show up at my apartment with a bottle of wine and no questions. I still haven't spoken to my father since that phone call. The offer stands, a financial advisor, a real one, no strings, no signature required from me. I don't know if he'll ever take it. That's not mine to control either, and it took me 35 years and 1 denied loan file to understand that not controlling it isn't the same as not caring. I used to think the opposite of being loved for what you provide was being loved for nothing at all, that if I stopped being useful, I'd disappear from the story entirely. It took losing the version of my family that only called when they needed something to learn the actual truth. The opposite of being loved for what you provide is just being loved. Quietly, without an invoice attached. My father called me the strong one for 35 years like it was a compliment, and it took me most of that time to understand it was actually a job description, one I never applied for, and one that came with no room for me to ever need anything back. Some people only come back once you've become useful to them again. That's not family showing up. That's an application dressed in a hug. If someone disappeared from your life the moment you had nothing, and only came back once you built something worth asking for, would you let them back in? And if you would, where would you draw the line and why? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them, the way I read every file, carefully and all the way to the end. If this one hit close to home, share it with somebody who needs to hear it, and subscribe for the next story. I'll see you there.